Hello, children of mine. What are you doing, Dad? Yeah, it's a good question. Uh, Reason for recording this video is kind of odd. I'll be totally transparent on that. Kind of the idea started as, once you become a parent, you have to start planning for all kinds of contingencies, right? You got to plan for retirement. When do you want to retire? How do you want to retire? You have to plan for if something happens to you, what's going to happen to your spouse. And where we arrive here is something happens to me, what happens to my kids. Now, culturally, we often view that through the prism of finances, right? So what's going to happen to my family financially? And we have an insurance industry that often takes the reins on that. And a lot of people do an okay job of that. They'll have a life insurance plan. Maybe the super prepared people will even have a will, uh, which a lot more people should have, including me at the time of this recording. But what very, very few people actually plan for is, what is the wisdom that I wish I could have passed on to my kids? What are the conversations we're going to miss out on because I'm not here any longer? And I've been thinking about that for a long time and thinking, I have tools available to me to make sure that I'm able to pass that information along. I should really do that. And then I get busy doing something else and it doesn't happen. So today I just said, you know what? Let's do it. Let's put something down and actually try to get this started, try to get in the habit of doing it somewhat regularly because you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's right around the corner. Nobody ever thinks it's going to be them that something happens to. So why not start now? So, and I was also talking to a friend who lives in Colorado that I, don't talk to anywhere near as often as we should. And I was thinking, oh, the same is true of my sister. She lives in Tucson. I hardly ever talk to her as often as I should, or my parents. And then I was thinking, my buddy Josh lives on the other side of this same city I live in, and we hardly ever see each other. So there's all this stuff in an average day that just goes unsaid, and you think, oh, I'll just talk to this person about it next time. What if there isn't a next time? And this kind of thinking really took off for me in 2019 when I unexpectedly lost one of my best friends. And there's all kinds of stuff you'll never get to say now. So, and I know this is a very depressing way to start this, but the thinking is it doesn't have to be that way. There are, we have YouTube. We've got all these tools now that people have never had in human history so that you can sort of still be there. It's still a shadow. It can't be interactive any longer, but you can still see me. You can still hear my voice, and you can hear the things that I wish I got the chance to tell you. So that's kind of the thought process behind this. And so who knows how many times I'll do this, but there are some things that I want to make sure I get the chance to say in my voice. You can hear it from me. And a lot of this comes from my own life experience, things I look back on from when I was growing up that I wish somebody would have told me and that I would have listened to if they had told me, because it would have made my life a whole lot easier. Taken some hurdles out of my way. So that's kind of how I think this might go if I keep doing it, but we'll see. It could be the type of thing where I make 2 of these and then forget about it and never do it again. So we'll see how it goes. So thing one, like if I only told you one thing, man, that's really tough. There's a few pieces of really key advice that I'd want to give you if I, if I'm not able to do it at a later date for whatever reason. But one of the things that I think creates a lot of issues for people just because they're unprepared, and there's not, families traditionally don't talk about it. School traditionally doesn't handle it, but it's financial education. And it can, especially in the US, man, if you get behind the eight ball, it is really tough to dig back out. And so much of our economy and our society is built around a consumption mindset of, buying stuff and having stuff. And we don't focus enough time and energy on just like finding a way to enjoy life without buying stuff all the time, and to appreciate the things that you don't have to pay for. And then responsibly figuring out what things are worth buying and paying for. I mean, you're surrounded constantly by this thing, by that thing, that I think a lot of purchasing happens kind of mindlessly, and then you end up with a bunch of crap that you never use. So one thing I definitely want to teach you guys is how to just be intentional with your money. Figure out what it is that you really want in life, what's really important to you, and dedicating the resources you have to those goals first. And then if you want to buy mindless stuff afterwards, once you've got those bases covered, great. Do what you want to do with that. That's called expendable money. And if you spend it on silly stuff, it doesn't matter. But why I think this is super important to hear as a kid is you probably have a lot more power to set up your future than you would actually think you would. And why do I say that, right? Because, as a kid, you don't have a six-figure job, so you might think, why, I can't really do anything to set myself up for the future. I've got to disagree. I think actually when you're a kid, it might possibly be one of the best times to do it. And why is that? Because when you're a kid, you might not have great earning power, but you have no financial responsibilities, right? Your parents, ideally, are covering most of that for you, right? You're not paying them rent. You don't have an electric bill you're paying on. You're not paying for insurance. You're not paying for, maybe you're paying for a cell phone, but probably that's it. You don't have a huge car payment. You don't have student loans. You don't have all of the other things that prevent a lot of older people from actually taking those steps that they should be taking to set up their financial house. So if you're a kid, if you're a high school kid, you get a job, theoretically, you could use most of that money to set up your future. You could invest it potentially. You could certainly save it to be a down payment for something, or for, if you wanted to go to college, you could do that, and so you don't have to take out gigantic student loans. So that's something to think about for sure. And I know it's hard when you're 16. I mean, I remember how I was thinking at the age of 16. It certainly wasn't about setting myself up financially for the future, but I wonder how much of that is part of the fact that my parents never talked about that. They didn't talk about finances with me. I never had any idea how much money they made. I didn't know what they paid for our house. I didn't know how much heat and electricity cost. I didn't know any of that stuff. And I think those are important things to start thinking about, at least when you are in those teenage years, because, man, they go by fast. And you think you have all the time in the world, but you really don't. So at least to start thinking along those lines of, hey, someday I am going to have a mortgage payment, or at very least I'm going to have to pay rent. I'm going to have electricity bills. I'm going to have insurance. Hopefully I'm going to have a 401k, and I'm going to be investing in my future. But learning how to think that way at an early age is really going to help. And, there, I'm sure there are limits in terms of being able to invest on your own, but a parent can help with that kind of thing. So any investments you make when you're like 16 years old, if you set that money in some kind of index fund and just forget about it, the time, the compound interest working for you from the time you're 16, I'm not probably the right person to explain to you in very detailed terms how that all works. What I can explain to you is the longer you set money in an account that creates compound interest, the faster that snowball works in your favor and the less money you ultimately have to stick in it yourself. So the short, super dumbed down version of this is if you put $10 into something that generates compound interest and you leave it for 10 years, it creates a decent number of wealth or decent amount of wealth kind of on its own. That, again, very dumbed down version, but that if you think of it that way at a very high level, it'll help you wrap your mind around it. But if you take, instead of 10 years, you make it 40 years, it explodes. It goes up usually exponentially. And then it's that much less money you have to save the older you get once you do have things like bills to pay. So one of my good buddies told me a long time ago that his mom sat down with him when he was a teenager and went through like a flip chart of, okay, what do you want out of life? Do you want to own a house someday? Do you want to buy a car someday? Do you ever want to get married, maybe have kids? And she started writing down dollar figures associated with each one of those decisions so that he would wrap his head around what the future looks like and how early you need to start planning if you really want to set yourself up for success. And granted, he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. But he took that advice to heart and he started setting himself up early. And guess what? He had college funds for his kids already started before he ever even had kids. So that's kind of what I want to do with this, is give you that advice that I wish I had had, so that maybe I could have been more prepared and started to make better decisions. Now, would I have? I don't know. I would like to think yes, but who knows? I might have still been just as unprepared, still spent just as much money on dumb stuff that I have nothing to show for now. But I hope I would have at least done something. And that's what I hope you'll do. So if you ever see this, take some time to think about it. There's all kinds of, I mean, who knows if YouTube will still be a thing when you're old enough to watch this, but there's all kinds of resources available to you now that weren't available when I was a kid. Take advantage of that. Go find thought leaders who are super smart about finances. Consume that kind of content. Get as educated as you can on finances while you're still young in high school. It's only going to help you. So that's it. This has been enough rambling. I hope some part of it is useful.